vara i Malmström och naturbruket, landsbygden och EU kommer att vara Juncker. Så vet ni ungefär hur det är tänkt. With that, maybe it's time to switch to English once again. And we're very happy to have Laura Verheke from Corporate Europe Observatory in Brussels with us. And the title of the presentation, I only have it in Swedish here, is Bryts den makt storföretagen utövar med hjälp av EU. Break the corporate power in the European Union. So with that, I give the floor to you, Laura. So welcome very much.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming. Thanks for the invitation. I'm really happy to be in Sweden. So I work for a lobby watchdog, as I said before. So we really look at lobbies in Brussels and we denounce them. I will focus my presentation on trade because I understood that.
Speak a bit louder.
Yeah, okay. I will focus my presentation on trade and how we've been fighting against European trade agreements. So I don't know, have any of you heard about CETA? Yeah? Okay. So it's a trade deal between the European Union and Canada. And I've done a play on world because CETA for us is also a corporate European trade agreement. And it's important when you speak about CETA to speak in terms of the entire trade agenda of the European Union, because they're not only negotiating with Canada, they also tried with the US and they're doing other trade deals, and we find common features in all the trade agreements. So it's important to keep in mind the big EU trade policies. Exactly is happening in terms of trade in the European Union. So we have actually negotiations for 10 trade and investment deals that are active negotiations. We have other negotiations going on now, much less active. For the moment, TTIP, so the agreement between the EU and the US, is frozen. CETA has gone through 9 ratifications. So we still can win some battles there. It hasn't gone through Sweden, for instance. And JEFTA is an agreement between the European Union and Japan. We know that they've almost finalized the deal. They want to show it in the World Trade Organization in Argentina in December as a mega trade deal, because the EU wants to show that they're open to the world while Trump isn't. To give you an idea, a deal between the EU and Japan covers 30% of the world economic output. So it's two huge markets that come together. But there's not only, big mega trade deals going on at the moment. You also have EU-Vietnam, EU-Singapore, and other EU agreements. And it's important to keep those in mind because there might be smaller countries and developing countries, but they're as much harmful as the other ones. What we've seen is for JEFTA, the agreement with Japan. So a trade agreement is about 1,700 pages, more or less. You have different chapters. And one of them is the investment chapter, which has been very controversial. It's when we give rights to investors, so we give rights to corporations, without any obligation. And not only do we give them rights, but we also give them the right to sue states if they feel those rights are not being respected. So it is very controversial. In this sense, if a trade deal doesn't have the investment chapter, like JEFTA, we know that the agreement with Japan will not have an investment chapter, then it will only go through the European Parliament and then it's done. If the agreements like CETA, for instance, have an investment chapter, then they have to go through national parliaments. So basically what happens is, with CETA, there's been a lot of controversy, and now it has to go through national parliaments. So now there's a democratic debate happening on those trade agreements, and with this debate comes a lot of scrutiny and a lot of disagreement, right? And the Commission doesn't want those trade deals to be publicly debated. So what it has done with JEFTA now, the new one with Japan, there will be no investment chapter. So we'll only go through the European Parliament, done deal. And that's why it's very important to think about CETA today still, because if we manage to actually stop CETA, then it means that we will actually kill the other ones that are coming after, like JEFTA and others. So it's still very important to think about this trade agreement. When you think about trade agreements in the European Union, it's really important to relate it to the core ideology of the Commission when they do those trade agreements, we really have a trade agreement that's trying to lock in neoliberalism. Sorry, I'm French, so sometimes some English words are complicated. So we're trying to lock in neoliberalism. It's really at the core, because what they do, those trade agreements, is really what Naomi Klein calls the rationale for greed, of vilifying the public sphere. Because there's an ideology in the Commission that actually Mrs. Malmström, sorry, I'm trying to pronounce well, but actually really she thinks that from the free trade, everybody wins. So there's no discussion about free trade. That's the ideology in the Commission. There will be no losers inside countries, no losers between countries, or no losers between sectors. To give you a bit of an idea, when they have an impact assessment of a trade agreement, they say 10,000 jobs will be lost, 15,000 jobs will be created, we'll win 5,000 jobs, done, great. But when you talk about 10,000 people losing their jobs, you talk about a farmer in Sweden, a fisherman in Portugal, a manufacturer in Italy, they're not going to become an IT engineer in Denmark or a miner in Poland. They're not. People are not like capital. They don't move so easily, right? So they really have no idea what it means in terms of people's lives, those trade agreements. They add up figures and then they think it's a good deal for Europe, and they just completely forget about the human stories behind this. And also we see a lot of liberal people in Europe that actually criticize those deals because it's going to fragmentate more Europe. Some countries are going to win much more than others. And even if you're pro-European, you can be a pro-European and against those trade deals for the very reasons that it's going to benefit certain countries and not others. And Europe is already hugely divided in terms of jobs, of economic welfare, and so on. So really the ideology is we get more trade, more competition, more growth, more jobs, everything's fine. And that's why we have to remind them that everything is actually not fine. Because it sets a precedent when you have CETA, but also once we will all ratify CETA, and it's a done deal, if it ever is a done deal, how are we going to change it? What if in 10 years we've been sued so much by corporations that Sweden, for instance, says, this is costing me too much money, how can I change this? How can Sweden go to the European Council, convince 25 member states to change CETA, and then convince Canada to change CETA? How is this going to be possible? Once we have this ratified, it's almost impossible to change it. So when we talk about those trade deals, we really like looking at actually who wrote CETA and TTIP and all the deals, who have actually been involved in the negotiations. Because it's the people from DG Trade, that's headed by Mrs. Malmström, that negotiate, but they have people negotiating with them really. If you look at this is the 597 meetings that happened on TTIP with people outside DG Trade. So this is a list of external meetings that we've asked to the official commission, and they give us this list. 88% of the people that have been met with TTIP negotiators are actually coming from corporations, from big business lobbies. And only 9% comes from public interest groups, trade unions or environmental NGOs. It doesn't add up to 100% just because some people come and talk to the Commission on their own name, not under an organization. But you clearly see who's been listened to and who's been met when we were negotiating TTIP. And there's a lot of things that are contested in those deals. I want to really focus on 3 things. The first one is ISDS, so it's the rights for a corporation to sue Sweden, or to sue Finland, or to sue Germany, or to sue the European Union. So let's say you open a nuclear station in Sweden, it's actually not going very well, there are some accidents, and you want to phase it out. You could actually be sued by the company operating that nuclear power station, but you would be sued not in Swedish courts, but in international courts. So the investor gets the right to choose the justice they want. If they feel like going to the Swedish courts, they probably won't win, then they can go to this special justice. This special justice where the lawyers and the arbitrator are paid by the hour. Let me show you how it would work. If you were that investor and you were Sweden, you would come to me as a law firm, pay me $800 an hour, and we will have a case, most probably in the World Bank. Sweden will, the investor will pay for a law firm. I will be paid also by a law firm, And Sweden will have to defend itself. They can never attack. This system is only one way. So it's only the investor against Sweden. Sweden, just to defend itself, will probably spend about $5 million. And that's OECD figures. It could be much more than that. I, as an arbitrator, who's going to have to judge this case, I'm also paid by the hour. Think about it. I'm an arbitrator. My decision tomorrow on this case will have an impact on my job. If I give right to the investor, he or she's going to come back to my law firm tomorrow and give me more money. If I give the right to Sweden, sorry Sweden, I don't care. You'll never come back and see me in a law firm because you'll never sue the investor. So there's clearly a conflict of interest here. And what happens now is we have 800 cases that we know of, but we don't know all of them. And what we have is 2/3 of the times it's either won by the investor or settled. When you settle, like we'll see some cases, the country actually can't afford the case. It's too expensive. So they either settle or they drop the law. That's one of the things that's quite controversial. So it happens after a law has been decided, or a decree, or a court decision. But before that, corporations are not only happy with this, they want more than that. They want to be involved in the writing of regulations, and this they can get through regulatory cooperation. It sounds really great because you all want to cooperate, right? We all want to make sure our laws are similar, we want to cooperate on climate change. But when we think about regulatory cooperation, what we have is companies and regulators coming together to make sure that new laws, in the case of CETA is between Canada and the EU, are actually not too different, not too bad for business. But if we have different laws here in Europe and in Canada, it's because we made different decisions. We've elected different people that took different democratic choices. And so in this case, what we want really is, what the corporations want is to make sure there are no differences. Because to them, difference in regulation, it's a cost. To us, it could actually mean a protection. It could be a protection from toxic chemicals, or it could be a protection from pollution and other things like this. Let me show you how much they got from regulatory cooperation. This is a report that we've written. You actually see Business Europe and the US Chamber of Commerce, and what they think when they think about regulatory cooperation, they think about a way to co-write regulations. And if you look at the US Chamber of Commerce, they had a meeting with the EU delegation in Washington, and they think that it's a gift that keeps on giving. And if you actually look at what is in the text in CETA and TTIP, you actually see very lot of similarities between what the business community asked and what the European Union has tabled in the negotiations. So you clearly see there's been a lot of influence from the business community. And it's important to, when you want to talk about those trade deals, it's really important to remind people where do they come from, who has been influencing those deals. That's why we've got this little cartoon here. This is Business Europe. So it's the biggest employers federation in Europe, and this is where new regulations gets made.
What does it say?
This is where new regulation gets made. It's a cartoon. So who is actually going to also win from those trade deals? Obviously, if we've seen the people that have been writing those deals, then we get an idea of the people who's going to win from those deals, obviously. This is a quote from the Chemical Industry Association of Canada after the signature of CETA. So CETA was signed by heads of state. This is when Magnet in Wallonia was actually against CETA, and then it went through the European Parliament. When it was signed, he had a quote from big, so it's kind of big companies. It's pesticides producer like BASF, Dow Chemicals, but also oil companies, Esso and Shell. And they said it's a good directions to be going. It will translate to less interference by governments in trade. So basically, thanks to those trade deals, we get less governments telling us what to do. That's really what they want from those trade deals. Here you have a quote from the French Business Federation, and it's interesting because they met with the Commission and they asked the Commission, what are you going to do about the 19 million small and medium enterprises in Europe that don't export and going to face increased competition? So the employers themselves, the big business, they know that small and medium enterprises are going to lose from those trade deals, but still if you look at all the communications, outside communications, they say it's good for small and medium enterprise. Here you have something that's really interesting. Is the vice president? I'll send you the link. My presentation is available online. So. The vice president of Chevron, he talks about ISDS, the possibility for a company to sue a country. And what he says is that only used it once. Chevron used it once in Ecuador. They had a leak in the Amazonian forest. The Ecuadorian Supreme Court asked them to clean the mess and pay for cleaning the mess. Chevron refused and sued Ecuador in an international tribunal with ISDS, and the case is ongoing. The cases take a lot of time. Can you imagine if I get paid $800 an hour? It's usually $3,000 a day for an arbitrator. I've got an interest in making it last longer and longer and longer because I get more money, right? But Chevron, what they were saying to the commission is, we've only used it once, but to us ISDS is important because we can use it as a deterrent. Obviously, think about this. Think if you're big corporations. Imagine tomorrow there's some fracking in Sweden, so they extract gas from the ground, and then Sweden actually wants to stop this because it's too bad for people and the environment. You would be a company and you would have the power to go to see the Swedish government and say, really, you want to do this? Well, this new law might cost you minimum $5 million. As a decision maker, obviously you're going to think about it twice before you actually pass a law. So you give the right to companies to actually lobby governments with a very powerful economic argument. And this is clearly said by Chevron. There is something else in those trade agreements. Sorry, I'm giving you more and more bad, depressing information. It's called negative lists. So before in trade, what we used to do is we used to tell companies, this is the kind of public services that you can exploit. Here is the list of services that are going to liberalize and that you can do as private companies. That's what we used to do before. Now what we do is we tell companies, okay, we're going to privatize everything, and then there'll be a list of exceptions. Who knows what kind of public services we will need in 30 years when we will have new technologies? It doesn't matter. They will have to be privatized because they will not be in the list of exceptions. This also means that with the negative lists, it also means that it's very difficult to put back into public hands. So when you've privatized something, if you want to nationalize it again, it's going to cost you a lot of money because it's going to make you go to ISDS again. This is a quote from the European Service Forum. This lobby organization was created in the 90s by Leon Britton. He was Commissioner for Trade at that time. He asked the president of Barclay to have a lobby to help him negotiate in trade. This lobby is made mostly of banks. And this lobby, when they heard that there was going to be negative list in CETA, so the privatization push basically, they say this is an important decision and it comes from years of advocacy in that direction. So this was clearly a victory of the lobbies. Just to give you a bit of an illustration, Poland actually privatized part of its health system. It didn't work, so they wanted to renationalize. When they renationalized, they were under ISDS, so they had a Dutch insurer suing Poland. Poland, it was so expensive, the case was so expensive for Poland that they settled. They paid more than 2 billion euros to the Dutch investors. That's the salary of 200,000 Polish nurses in a year. That's the list, so you don't see very well. That's the list of organizations that are taking part in regulatory cooperation between the US and the EU. This is the group of people that decides what kind of chemicals are toxic. This is the group that then will have an influence on the legislation in the US and Canada. There's 24 members in that group. 21 of them come from companies, and the ones that we know really well, Dow, DuPont, and others. There's only 3 NGOs there. I want to finish with something more positive, if I can. The investment chapter of CETA had to be changed. It's been a bit improved, not that much, but a bit. Meaning that the Commission feels the pressure coming from people. It's been the government of Wallonia that actually asked for changes and was really against CETA at the beginning, because there's been a huge mobilization in Belgium. The health insurers, the trade unions, the environmental movement, the farmers movement, everybody worked together, and then finally the government listened. Now what we see is that Cecilia Malmström and others, they have a new communication strategy and a new PR, and they know they have to sell this because they know it's going to be hard to sell. If they know it's going to be hard to sell, it's because they also know it's not going to be good for people, so people don't want it. And finally, what I've just done now is what I do most of the time, unfortunately, is I give you out very depressing information, and you are here on a Saturday and you're going to go home and think, wow, this is crazy, what can I do? And I think something that we can take as a positive thing that happened during all the mobilization against CETA, that's from experience in Belgium and France, is that we've always given something fun and local for people to do. So we don't only share information and tell them who's going to be the winners and the losers of those deals, but we also give them something to do. So just to finish, let me give you something a bit more positive. This is a list of all the TTIP, CETA and TISA free zones in Europe. As you can tell, there's quite a lot of them. So those are people coming to talks about CETA and European trade deals, feeling depressed but also feeling empowered. And they had a declaration that they gave to their local mayors. And this is all the cities and the rural villages across Europe that have declarations against CETA. And this has been super powerful to give something for people to do. And if I may finish, we're very proud of this because every time Malmström was speaking in Brussels on TTIP and CETA, we started singing when she was talking. But she was refusing to speak to us. So if she didn't want to listen to us, why should we listen to her, right? So that's something very funny that we did. Maybe you won't hear it. But I want to finish with this because
in order to advise legislators for the future on how to make the best standard.
So should we get sorry for the song.
Ja, då är det dags att gå till workshopsarna. Och det är 3 stycken parallella pass. Och först är stoppa storföretagens makt och handelspolitik. Med Laura, och så kommer Maruška vara med. Som sitter där från Friends of the Earth i Kroatien. Och det kommer att vara här i Delors. Sen är det nästa parallellpunkt då, militarisering av EU, där Tord kommer att vara med och Dave.
Och det ser ni på väggen där, det är militariseringen även inre, det är EU-toppmötet 2001 med Schillerska stormningen där med antiterroristpolisen. Så det är militarisering som pågår på alla nivåer. Och alternativet är naturligtvis Gandhi.
Ja, och det är i rummet som heter Malmström. Så. Lite längre in i korridoren. Sen tredje passet, naturbruket, landsbygden och EU. Och det är i rummet som heter Juncker. Så ta er till det rummet som ni vill.
Snart ska vi stänga fönstret så mycket syre som möjligt. Är det någon som behöver översättning till svenska så vinka lite till mig så kan vi hjälpa till. Vi är inte så många och vi vill gärna att det ska vara delaktigt så att alla är med i diskussionen. Så därför tänkte jag, vi kör bara en kort presentationsrunda vem ni är. Säg vem ni är och om ni är från en organisation eller vilken plats ni är från. Eller något ni är engagerade i.
Ja, hej, jag heter Jenny och jag är engagerad i fossilgasfällan.
Jag heter Johan Lönnroth och jag är medlem i någonting som heter den tredje vänstern. Men ni vet inte vad det betyder. Men...
Jag heter Carlos Muñoz och jag kommer från Chile.
Jag heter Gunilla Ryd och jag är från Vänsterpartiet i Malmö. Det är bland annat sitter i kommunfullmäktige.
De Puntarenas, Magallanes. Långt.
Amanda Tanovic, samhällslärare, eller blivande samhällslärare.
From Tampere, Finland, active with Friends of the Earth Finland, Siemenpuu Foundation, Green Party, among others.
We already heard this morning from Ekis, Kajsa, about big business and their close relations to the European Union. And also Laura spoke about it, about these trade agreements a lot now. So I think further on we could have more discussions, specifically also about the trade agreements. But I think I should give the word, because you spoke now, so I should give the word to Marushka for a while, and you speak some of your thoughts about corporate power and so. Please.
My name is Marushka Milata. I work for Friends of the Earth in Croatia, and I work a lot on climate issues, and I follow also the climate negotiations, the UN climate negotiations, and I want to maybe focus on that and the corporate aspect on the influence on climate policies. So actually the corporate issue in the climate negotiations is huge. There's a lot of lobbying behind closed doors, but also in the recent years, corporations are not anymore hiding. Actually, they're having big influence on the negotiations process. I think the biggest kind of corporate influence in the negotiations was in the climate negotiations in Warsaw in 2013, where actually all the big kind of coal companies, but also some metal industries and oil, have actually sponsored the climate negotiations, which is ridiculous because that's like if tobacco industry would sponsor a conference on cancer. It's insane. And also they organized events where they presented technologies that would make coal clean. That's what they're saying, that there's something that's called clean coal, which doesn't exist. So these are the technologies like CCS, carbon capture and storage, which they're promoting in order to keep continuing using fossil fuels. And I wanted to make this example because the then UN Commissioner for the Secretary of the UN for Climate Change attended this conference. And then we could see the close ties between the politicians and even on the UN level with the fossil fuel industry. So the civil society, social movements, different NGOs, unions protested this climate talks in Warsaw, and 800 of us, I think, walked out of the negotiations in protest of this, and also lack of progress in general in the negotiations, because now it's more than 20 years that they're negotiating on this topic. Just now there was yesterday the climate negotiations finished in Bonn in Germany, and again that there was very low progress, and this is all, I mean, we know that this is because of the lobbying of corporations, because they are the ones profiting from fossil fuel use, and they don't want us to have a just transition into a post-fossil fuel society. So this is a huge problem, and even though we got a new global agreement in Paris in 2015, this agreement is not ambitious enough, and this is because of the corporate lobbies, of course, and they managed to, for example, not include human rights in this agreement. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Paris Agreement, but they managed to push out human rights. And of course, corporations violate human rights all over the world in their extractive activities in Latin America and Africa. So of course, they don't want this to be in any kind of global agreements. But now there is a whole process happening in Geneva to get a treaty, a binding treaty for corporations, so they stop violating human rights. So there is some progress happening on this field, but it's quite slow. Yeah, so maybe I stop here, just give kind of general this overview.
Okay. A few words from Marco, or?
Well, yeah.
Yeah.
On this climate negotiations and the business lobby, like I often think in terms what can be done. And you mentioned the case of tobacco, but it's very specific that when the countries made this kind of same kind of framework convention, that also the climate convention is called framework convention on tobacco control, then sort of our types were able to introduce a clause there which sort of prohibits tobacco industry to be part of health policy making. So they basically closed the doors in WHO, the World Health Organization, and especially in the Tobacco Framework Convention, for business lobby to have any presence. And some countries have gone to the extent that they have put it in their national law, and there's also then the guidelines like how to do these exclusions more specifically. And so in some countries there's a law that the tobacco industry must not be involved in health policy making. And some months before the Warsaw meeting, there was some talk and some papers were written about that we would need this kind of, I think it's called clause 5.3. So the climate convention would need to have something similar, and there's some activity. I think maybe you know more about it to purge the fossil lobby from the climate negotiations. And well, you mentioned the binding treaty process, and I think that's also something that we can all play a role. That's the same way the corporates want to use the international law with their investment settlements. Then, so this is sort of our offense that let us use the human rights law to put corporations in place and make them responsible for the harm that they are doing. And I think it was like 3-4 years ago, the United Nations Council for Human Rights passed this, also started the process that there is this voluntary guidelines for sort of human rights and business, but they are voluntary, like the Paris Agreement it's basically voluntary. So that we need something with more teeth, and then there's the experience of the International Criminal Court, although it's not working well. Some countries like US and I think Russia, some others have opted out, but anyhow it's there. So same way the idea that let's have a human rights instrument, human rights legislation that enables us to sue the corporations when they are involved in the human rights abuse, and have, this preventive, but then also compensate for the damage that is done. And the situation is that many developing countries, with Ecuador leading the process, are sort of agreeing, putting ideas forward, but the EU and other US, I guess Russia also, that have these transnational corporations that would be under this treaty are opposing. So like in Sweden and other countries in Europe, we should really see to that our governments enter into the negotiations play a constructive role there.
Okay. Utan the general discussion here is European Union, corporate power. What is that connection, and how can the European Union be a tool to really control also these governments or these companies, or does these companies use European Union only to control us? Or what can we do about European Union and corporate power? This is the main topic, but of course you can ask also details. To say that every big company, they must tell where do they have employers, where do they work, and where do they pay tax, and the tax they pay. So country by country reporting, they should tell wherever in the world they act, where do we pay tax. Because sometimes it's legal because they know the creepholes, but it would be very evident to make it public, because then journalists and active groups could really show it more publicly. And the big corporations, they absolutely hate this, that it becomes even more public where they put their money when they escape from tax. So there is such a proposal even on the table in the European Parliament now. And the Parliament voted yes to it, even when it was a little bit weaker. And now it's on the table of the countries in the Council. And now it's hard pressure from big corporations on every nation. Say, vote against this, vote against this. So the big companies in Germany, they go to Merkel and say, vote against it. And the big companies in Sweden, they go to the Swedish government and say, vote against it. And the vote will be very close. And unfortunately, the finance minister of Sweden, she said, no, we're going to vote against it. And this, I think it's really bad if this government, a social democrat dominated government, votes against a progressive rule against tax evasion. But after the last leak now, the Paradise Papers 2 weeks ago, they start saying again, we must check it and look it over. So that is a very practical thing where a decision in the European Union could make some progress. And this is the chance this year for the Swedish government. So I hope they take it. All right, more people. Yes, runt om i Sverige och så. Och nu kommer det tillbaka via Malmström. Så att, lägg det här på minnet, det här begreppet mitt, för det kommer att komma närmsta året som en stor sak. Och det är ju precis samma sak. Det är företag ska kunna... Men människor som utsätts för företag, hur de har ju inte samma rättighet. EU och USA har blockerat i flera år processen i FN om att ställa storföretag till svars. Men det här vill man driva igenom i FN-systemet bara på 2 år bakvägen. Så det